Okay, just a quick review of our agenda for today. This is our investment strategy. Um, we will be going over an overview of what investment strategy requirements are. So these are federal requirements. Discuss life cycle planning strategies, and then establish the strategies to be used in the 2026 TAMP. We have some of the strategies are prescribed, and then we have some choices to make on others. And then we'll kind of round out with what's going to happen next. Just to kind of level set where we are in the process here. So we did our kickoff back in March, and we actually covered in March what we had previously done in 4 separate workshops. And in part, this is possible because this is our 3rd time through it. I think we really honed it to be much more concise maybe than it was early on. And frankly, many of you have been involved in our prior TAMP development. So many of us on the call have climbed the learning curve before. And so we started off in March with a bang. Then in May, we transitioned over to risk management. We had our 2 workshops to develop our risk statements. And from day 1 to day 2, we did a breakouts. We were able to get some pretty concise risk definitions and got good input on mitigation strategies and monitoring approaches, which is important because there is a requirement within the asset management plan to have a risk management plan within it. And then that brings us to today, which is where we are now with our investment strategies. Once we finish the next hour in our investment strategy discussion, we will have presented all the workshop material that we need. And from the Caltrans standpoint, we will largely be waiting for the remaining MPOs to submit their performance targeting analysis tool worksheet. We have been receiving these, and for those of you that have already submitted them, thank you very much. It helps us to not get all the MPOs at once, so we can kind of take them on a flow basis as you get them done. So we're near the end of June. We've got about 6.5, 7 weeks before the deadline for those performance targeting analysis worksheets. Those will become absolutely critical for us to do our investment strategy. So following the workshop today, the submittals from all the MPOs of their worksheets, we will get to bringing all of this information together in writing a draft transportation asset management plan. We expect the plan will be available for public review in November and December. And just to clarify, we are inviting cities and counties to these workshops because the cities and counties are actually the asset owners, and in many cases are the ones doing the asset management. However, under federal regulations, we will be aggregating or asking all of the MPOs actually to aggregate all of their respective counties and or cities or committees, whatever their structure may be underneath each MPO, to be aggregating all that at the MPO. So each city and county does not need to submit one. They're submitted at the MPO level, and then so we'll have 18. There's one portion of California, 1 or 2 that aren't covered by an MPO, so we will generally get that from the RTPA, and then we will pair those with Caltrans worksheet, and that makes a comprehensive set. So after today's workshop, there will be a bit of a break before you see anything as we get to actually writing all of the narrative of the TAMP and compiling information. But really between now and the deadline of August 15th for those worksheets, there's some work we can do in Caltrans, but we really can't like dig in earnest until after we have all those worksheets. Okay, so timeline overall. So there's a number of stakeholders. Certainly all of the people in the call here are stakeholders. But beyond this group, once we get to November, we think we'll have an internal review that we'll do within Caltrans just to make sure that we don't have any glaring issues in the production of the document. And then we'll make that available. We're saying December, January. It's possible it'll be on the earlier end of all of that. It just really depends on how much progress we make then. But as soon as we get to a point that we've got a draft, then we'll get it out to all of you. I'm hoping that's going to be like early December. Then we'll give all of you a chance to review it, provide any comments. Once we receive those comments in early 2026, we need to provide the draft to the commission for their review. We also have to provide the draft to the Federal Highway Administration for their review, because in this case, we have one document that has to be essentially certified by the federal government and adopted by the commission both. So I've described this before as kind of threading a needle here, but we do have these sort of two different oversight groups that look at the transportation asset management plan for California through different lenses. So the federal government lens is very prescribed. There's all these things you must do. They're compulsory. And we've been walking you all through those compulsory things. From the California regulation standpoint, there's not the same prescriptive, but there are comments that come in through the commission meetings from the commissioners themselves. So it'll go through a series of reviews and comments and edits with our final TAMP. We expect to be certified and adopted by May of 2026. So that's kind of the overall timeline of these various reviews that we have. Okay, so jumping into a little bit of the background on the investment strategies and what we have to accomplish. These are two of the federal regulations. These are in Title 23 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 515.5, for those that want to read on their own. But basically, it defines asset management investment strategies as policies for resource allocation that deliver the best asset performance given the available funds and the goals and objectives of the state and local agencies, all of you. As we look at generating our investment strategy, it's going to involve assessing various funding scenarios designed to achieve and sustain a desired state of repair. That designed to achieve and sustain a desired state of repair is one of the tests that we have to pass in order for our asset management plan to be certified. And so there's a lot of components involved in these two simple sentences. In fact, it's all the workshops that we've done to date plus today's workshop. So the investment strategies are sort of where it all gets sort of brought together, if you will. And together, if we were one agency is one thing, but we're not really, in the way we develop the asset management plan, we're really bringing together individual MPOs investment strategies, and we're coupling them with all the peer MPOs as well as Caltrans. And collectively, that's what makes the California Transportation Asset Management Plan. So when we talk about investment strategies, this is a conceptual example. But what we have to do is we have to look at a 10-year time horizon, and we have to look at these 5 work types that are shown in that first column: initial construction, maintenance, preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So these are all part of federal regulations. So in this example, and again, this is meant to help people sort of understand what we're endeavoring to do here today. This is an example, what I would call heavy initial construction. So here you can see that we have 3 years, year 1, year 3, year 7, where there's a lot of dollar signs that we're saying we're going to put into initial construction, meaning these are things that don't already exist. Okay, so there's new construction, and in order to balance our available funding, we're doing this at the expense of preservation and rehab. Okay, so this is a potential scenario which we would call heavy initial construction, or really this is a system expansion type of investment strategy, because there's minimal amount in some of these years related to preservation and rehabilitation and reconstruction, but some pretty heavy amounts in expansion. Now we can contrast that with example 2 here, which is a very preservation rehabilitation heavy focus. So this here, we're showing little or no initial construction. In other words, we're not expanding the system. We're putting our money by policy, by strategy, into preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So these are two obviously very, very different ways of investing available transportation funding. And these two strategies would result in very, very different end period conditions, right? So generally speaking, example 2 would result in much better conditions at the end of 10 years than example 1, but you don't have all the shiny new ribbon cuttings that you have in example 1. So these are just two of what are probably an infinite number of permutations of how investment funding could be invested. So what are these requirements? So in addition to the analysis for these things, our asset management plan has to discuss, meaning we have to write narrative on how the investment strategies would collectively support or make progress towards 4 things. Achieving and sustaining the desired state of good repair over the life cycle of the asset. Okay, so this is bringing in the life cycle planning component. Improving or preserving the condition of assets and performance of the National Highway System assets. Achieving the state DOT targets for asset condition and performance of the NHS in accordance with the United States Code 150, subsection D. With respect to number 3, when we say the state DOT targets, the way that Caltrans implements the TAMP, our target is all of your targets, right? So you are each setting your own regional targets. Those will then come together. Each MPO has their own, and then we will take that information, pair it with Caltrans expected budgets and targets, and from that we will create an aggregate that is reflective of all of your individual regional assessments into our overall TAMP. And all of this is supposed to be achieving the national goals that are defined in law. So same section 23, United States Code 150. Here section, it's B through B, C, D, and so forth. But these are basically the regulations or the laws. These are all captured in 23 CFR 515.9 if you want to actually read the regulations. So this is kind of what we have to be able to do in order to get our asset management plan certified. So the federal requirements say that the processes that they talked about documenting on the previous slide, they must describe how investment strategies are influenced at a minimum by performance gap analysis, life cycle planning, risk management analysis, and available funding and estimated costs of future work. So these 4 things, after we finish today, we will have covered all 4 of these things through the workshops that we've hosted to date. And we've provided lots of information to all of you, as well as a tool that does all of this. But all of these things must be written, and a lot of narrative needs to be wrapped around these as well as examples. So this is a lot of the time between when we finish today and when we get a draft out will be spent with all this writing. So just a refresher in case you haven't been able to attend all of these workshops. The building blocks for performance gap analysis include a baseline inventory and condition of the NHS pavement and bridges. We provided that to all MPOs in California back in March. The available funding for NHS pavement and bridges by work type. We provided that to you as reported to the state controller back in March. The unit costs of work to improve condition, those were embedded within the performance targeting analysis tool that we gave you back in March. The type of work to improve fair to good or poor to good, those were also included in the performance targeting analysis tool. Deterioration rates for the National Highway System pavement and bridges were also included in that tool, as well as the targets that your agencies have established. Now, you have the opportunity to change your target if you wish, but you don't have to. And we preloaded it with your current targets that are, as far as we know, these are the current targets for each MPO in California. Just a quick note about mapping federal work types. So this is something that's prescribed in the regulations. And I just want to point out that when we look at these different work types, some of them will make improvements in condition and some will not. So for example, initial construction does not improve your asset condition for any existing asset because you're building a brand new asset. Maintenance is generally considered to not improve the condition of any asset. Preservation and rehabilitation and reconstruction would include both fair and poor condition. So when you're looking at how much money you're investing in these different areas or proposing to invest in these areas, just realize that whatever you put into new construction will have zero impact on your ability to achieve your desired state of repair. And same with maintenance, but the others will have a direct impact. So from our prior workshops, I kind of walked through all this. We provided to all MPOs inventory and condition. This was done in GIS shapefiles, in maps, in lists, in Google Earth importable files. We provided you information from that you all had reported to the state controller. We extracted that, we parsed it out by MPO, we provided that. We preloaded the performance targeting analysis tool with your existing targets, and we have embedded unit costs for various types of work, which are something that you all can change if you don't believe those are appropriate for you. But we did put reasonably accurate costs based on analysis of our projects on the state highway system. And then finally, all of this sort of comes together in this Excel spreadsheet that we call the performance targeting analysis tool. Each of you received a copy of this, each MPO. It was already preloaded with all of these things that I mentioned. In addition, following that work, we did the risk mitigation workshops, and we'll kind of talk about how that comes into play here. So what does this performance targeting analysis tool do? It allows you to evaluate whether your targets are appropriate given a funding level. It does the performance gap analysis for you, and it does an evaluation of your investment strategy. So if in your jurisdiction you want to achieve a certain level of condition, it will require a certain investment. And as we just saw in this worksheet, that investment will have to be in the form of preservation, rehabilitation, or reconstruction. Whatever is put towards initial construction or maintenance will not improve the condition. But this single tool basically is doing all three of these things, or can be used for all three of these things, which is why, we think it's a simple tool, but it's fairly effective. One of the outcomes of the performance targeting analysis tool is the gap analysis, and we present it both in terms of dollars, performance, quantities, lane miles of pavement, square feet of bridge, as well as percent of the inventory. And this graph is showing the various analysis that the performance targeting analysis tool does. So on the very left column, we have your current condition. And then There's a projection of what would happen if you didn't invest anything. So what's your 10-year do nothing scenario look like? And you could see that going from current to doing nothing for the next 10 years obviously results in a greater percentage of poor and a greater percentage of fair and a lesser percentage of good. And then at the investment levels that are in your worksheet, we would expect that you be able to achieve the third column in that says 10-year invested. That is within a 10-year period, if you invested the amount of money that you have defined in your financial plan, subject to the unit costs that you have and the deterioration rates that you're using, then in this particular scenario, the poor would shrink from 4.4% currently down to 1.7, and the fair would go from 45.7 to 50.4. And the poor, or sorry, the good would stay, drops a couple percent, right? From that 10-year view of life, we proportion out a 4-year invested number, right? So this all is calculated for you in this worksheet. So within the first 4 years, we would expect you to be able to reduce your poor from 4.4% down to 3.3. And you can see the corresponding changes here. And then the final set of columns on the far right is what are your established targets? So the target that has been established is 1.5% poor. This is the Caltrans target, 50% fair and 48.5% good. So even at the 10-year invested level, we are very close to where we want to be, but we're falling 0.2% short on the poor and about 0.4% short on the fair. So that's how you use the results of the performance targeting analysis tool to evaluate your investments. Okay, one of the things we're required to consider is life cycle planning. And so the life cycle planning inputs are almost identical to the performance management inputs. What's your current condition? How much funding do you have? What's your analysis time frame? It's 10 years in our scenario. What do your deterioration models look like? What are your treatment costs? How effective are your treatments? And different treatments have different effectiveness. Then what are you doing with respect to risk mitigation? And then, what are the details associated with your strategy and rules that you might be thinking about? So if you think about what all this means for all of the transportation agencies in this call, you carry out your business year over year with all of these things, and you're making decisions about where you put your funding relative to deterioration, relative to whatever kind of realized risks might pop up, relative to the current costs of material and labor to do work, and certainly where your inventory starts in terms of condition makes a big difference. And so whether you have formalized this or not, you have a life cycle plan. Okay, and a life cycle plan, I think this just gives you a way to more formally think about what you're doing and is what you're doing the most effective for you. So a lot of times you'll hear people say things like, well, we're doing a worst first approach, meaning we're waiting for the next thing to break and then that's where our money goes. That's generally not considered the best asset management approach. I know in Caltrans, we are a very preservation, rehab, rehabilitation heavy organization. And we have a fair amount of history that demonstrates that if we invest in preservation and rehabilitation and maintenance, then we will slow down the need for those really, really expensive reconstructions or replacements. So this is really, and when you think about life cycle planning, we're not talking about necessarily just 10 years. I mean, the time scale on transportation infrastructure, bridges are going to last way longer than 10 years. Pavement oftentimes is going to last longer than 10 years. So you're really trying to think across a long period of time what is the most economical thing to do to get the best outcome. And that's really what life cycle planning is all about. So to kind of put that into sort of a practical sense with the TAMP, when we think about an asset class, and I realize the graphic shows a single bridge, but we're not talking about one bridge. We're talking about every bridge you are responsible for. And these bridges may have risks. They may have seismic risks or scour risks or fatigue risks or impact risks that you need to consider. You have funding. Every agency I know has some finite funding that they have to think about. And then you have all of the strategies. So you have, what is my strategy? Well, I can have, as you saw, I could have a very expansion heavy strategy, and I'm going to get an expansive heavy outcome in terms of my existing infrastructure, meaning the condition's going to drop. Or I could have another strategy like the one I showed earlier, where you could have a very preservation rehabilitation heavy strategy, and you're going to get a much better condition outcome, but you're going to get less new assets, right? And so all of this has to come together in ultimately our investment strategy, which is reflected through a planned set of investments, a financial plan, and that all builds in to the TAMP. And so a lot of times when we think about life cycle planning, again, it's not one asset. You're not thinking about a single bridge. You're thinking about every bridge in your inventory simultaneously. And so what are you thinking about in the short term over the life of an asset? So a bridge could be 50, 75 years. What is the best course of action to take for a class of bridges over a 50 to 75 year period to minimize the long-term cost of ownership, inclusive of replacement or a reconstruction? So that's a lot. It's a lot to think about all of that at once. That's why we have this performance targeting analysis tool. It helps with this understanding. Okay, and then just to, this question always comes up. What's the difference between life cycle planning versus life cycle cost analysis? Again, life cycle planning is network level. It's all of your bridges. Life cycle cost analysis is one bridge. Okay, so life cycle cost analysis might be various alternatives to address one bridge. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here are different investment strategies for the entire network of bridges. Okay, so then I'll finish up here with risk. So from our June TAMP workshop, we talked about a number of different risks. Some of them are climate driven, things like sea level rise, coastal erosion, local flooding. We talked about funding, inadequate funding or loss of funding for whatever reason. We talked a little bit about wildfire and what does that mean in terms of the transportation system. At least from the Caltrans standpoint, wildfire is a risk that we think about, and we invest in wildfire mitigation in a couple different ways. One is through vegetation control, and the other is through hardening the system or making the system more resilient by removing flammable materials. Think wooden guardrail posts versus metal guardrail posts, or wooden signposts versus metal signposts. But we're also looking at how the transportation system serves the public during wildfire evacuations. And so that's something that's kind of top of mind for Caltrans right now. Certainly there's resource constraints and maybe staffing resource constraints or uncertainties. Like, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen with tariffs. We don't know what the federal government's going to do in terms of future funding. We're in the midst of reauthorization. There's a lot of unknowns with respect to resources. And then there was a number of things that were identified that I just called investment decision making. Do we invest in this or that? How much are we putting into safety versus preservation versus system expansion versus risk mitigation? All of those things come into play. They're all risks. And certainly legislative or regulations, those are an issue. And then there may be some opportunities. So risks can be opportunities as well. And if you think about technology with autonomous vehicles and AI, these have the potential to make our transportation system much safer, for example, and maybe even allow transportation to travel at faster speeds because it could be done safely at those higher speeds. So we talked about all of this. We formed it into a number of risk statements that we all worked on. And so within the performance targeting analysis tool, I just want to highlight that in this estimated investment section, there is this percent of funding that you propose to go to risk mitigation. And this is available both in preservation, rehab, and reconstruction work types. And then this is showing Caltrans. So in Caltrans, 27% of our preservation rehab budget is going to risk mitigation of some sort. And that represents 16% of overall available funding across all of these work types. So this is right from our prior performance targeting analysis tool. So we know that in Caltrans, we're spending 16% of available funding on risk mitigation. That means that 16% of the funding is not available for condition improvement. Okay, so these are all about trade-offs. So yeah, so finally, I mean, this all comes down to a balancing act. What are available finances? What are condition predictions? What are our targets in estate good repair? What other competing priorities do we have? What is our preferred life cycle planning strategy? And what are we going to do with risk mitigation? Are we investing in it? Are we not investing in it? And if we are, to what degree are we investing in it? And then taking all of those things together, that forms our investment plan. So hopefully that little background kind of gets everybody thinking sort of where this is going today. And at this point, I want to turn it over. Let's see, where are we at time-wise? Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Turner with our team up here in asset management in Sacramento. And we're going to solicit some input from all of you. So Lauren?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, this is the part of the workshop where we need your input. So hopefully Mike talked through a lot of the different aspects of investment strategies and some things to consider. And we're looking for ideas from you all on what things we might consider to include in this upcoming TAMP. Next slide, Mike, please. So as you recall from earlier in this presentation, there are two investment strategies that we're required to include in the TAMP, and we've included this in the 2018 TAMP and the 2022 TAMP, and of course we're going to include it in this TAMP. And those are maintaining asset conditions for our pavement and bridges on the NHS. That's basically the current conditions. Can we prevent these conditions, prevent our pavements, prevent our bridges from deteriorating into worsening conditions? And this, in theory, represents kind of the minimum, investment and minimum effort, just so that we don't slide into a worse state of repair on our system. So we have to do that analysis to see what is the cost of just not slipping further into worsening conditions. And of course, the other end of this is, what is it going to cost? What does it take for us to bring our bridges and pavements on the NHS to our desired state of repair, our target conditions? And that's the second one. And we expect a good mix of well thought through investment strategies that consider risk, consider life cycle planning, and this is where we want to be. So those two are required components of the TAMP. But we have the opportunity to think about other investment strategies. And we've talked a lot about risk in the two preceding workshops and all the different kind of risks that can impact our system. Mike just showed in a slide that, at least for Caltrans, when we look at the state highway system and all the bridges and pavements and our system that we're maintaining, our investment is roughly 16% of our total investment towards risk mitigation. And these are things like seismic hazards for our bridges, our roadways, scour hazards. This can include things related to climate, that we think of sea level rise and coastal cliff retreat, inundation due to flooding. It could be wildfire risk, a whole suite of risks that impact our system that we have to set funding aside. We are having to anticipate mitigating those risks and also reacting to those risks materializing. And I'm sure all of the cities, counties, the MPOs have some component of risk mitigation that's being considered, and the degree to which we can capture that and quantify that and consider that in our analysis, that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. But that is one investment strategy that we could consider is increasing mitigation or considering it at all for maybe some cities and counties that may not have the resources to fully consider, let's say, the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, for instance. If we were to redirect funding and resources to mitigate those risks. Of course, that means there's less funding and resources available to do things like maintain condition or fix our assets. So what are those trade-offs, and looking at the sensitivity of redirecting more resources towards risk mitigation? A greater preservation focus. So that is a strategy. You may recall Mike had a slide earlier on about building more infrastructure versus focusing on a preservation strategy. So that's something that can be dialed in to try to understand what is the right level of preservation versus building out. Funding system expansion. So there is we know there's a lot of support and a lot of pressures to expand. The system needs to grow with the population increase. We need to expand the system to have more bike and pedestrian facilities. There's a lot of desire to see more system expansion, constructing new highways, building out the system. And there's a balancing act here too, because the more we build, the more we have to maintain, and we may be building at the expense of not maintaining or fixing it, what we call fix it first, a fix it first strategy of maintaining what we have. So how do we strike that balance, and what does that look like if we do start putting more towards building new infrastructure at the expense of not preserving or maintaining what we have or rehabilitating what we have? What are the impacts on our overall system conditions over this 10-year time frame? And then there are other strategies that we probably should consider. But I want to pause for a moment here, maybe tease out a little bit, going back to risk mitigation. We saw a slide that Mike had prepared earlier on the PTAP, Performance Target Analysis tool, that showed that at Caltrans, when we look at the state highway system, largely the interstates and many of the main highways that Caltrans maintains, it's about 16%. I mean, that equates to roughly, it's over $1 billion a year that we set aside for risk mitigation. And if we were to look at a scenario for the cities and counties about what level would be appropriate, we're looking for input from you all about what might be an appropriate level to consider in a scenario or an investment strategy. Would it be appropriate, let's say, to consider that, let's assume all cities and counties were to set aside roughly 16%. Does that seem about right sized? Or does that seem low? Does it seem like that needs to be higher or something lower than that? Looking for input from any of you. Feel free to put it in the chat. If you want to speak up, raise your hand. Have any feedback for us on whether or not you think that roughly 15, 16% risk mitigation level sounds about right. And I'm speaking about this without having seen all the performance target analysis tool results back from the MPOs. We had 3 or 4 that have come in, so we haven't seen those numbers. I know the last time we did this 4 years ago, we didn't see much in the way of at least declaring or stating a percentage that was set aside for risk mitigation. Pause. Any takers? Anyone want to chime in or give us some input or some feedback on that?
I don't see any hands.
Don't see any hands. Well, so, I mean, what we can do, like I said, once all the performance target analysis tool spreadsheets come back to us, we can certainly take a look at across all the MPOs and look at kind of what those levels, what kind of levels have been set. I'd encourage you to try to parse that out to the extent you can. I know this can be a little tricky. I know it can be tricky here at Caltrans, just trying to parse through, well, what portion of the project is really risk mitigation versus just over the course of work trying to maintain our assets or expand the system. Sometimes that can be a little difficult to pin down, but I would encourage you all, to the extent that you can, if you could try to pin that down and try to parse that out of when you submit those PTAT spreadsheets, that would certainly help us to try to refine this particular scenario, if this is a scenario that we move forward with.
There was a comment, Lauren, in the chat
Yeah.
from Rich from LA Metro. I'm not sure it was identifying another risk. Rich, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate with respect to this question that's on the table, which is one, does LA Metro spend and invest money in risk mitigation? And if so, what percentage of your available transportation budget is that?
I apologize. Despite my long career elsewhere, like New York State DOT, I don't have that information in front of me because I'm just 2 months into my metro career. I got invited in by another friend of mine. So I don't have that budget information, and I apologize to the group. But I'm thinking aloud more when we're looking at investment strategies: is how much do we, in general, look between agencies to identify both sources of risk mitigation funding where we can pool and locations. I'm a GIS guy, so the first thing I think about is location for shared services and shared investment into how we preserve things, because we have assets that run very closely together. So maybe sometimes the effort looking in where we can share our expertises and our abilities might be in order.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I don't know if you were able to join us in our risk mitigation workshops, but we did talk about the requirement to define repeatedly damaged infrastructure. And I think that's one of those opportunities where we see infrastructure, particularly if it's on the boundary between state highway and local agencies. Those would be really good opportunities to look at, collaborating in terms of mitigation. But I know for Caltrans, a lot of the costs, Lauren, throughout the $1 billion number, a lot of that is actually repair of damage that occurs. So we have slides, we have fires, we have vehicles and ships running into infrastructure. And so a lot of that annual cost is actually addressing a risk that's already been realized. In addition to that, we try to get out in front of our risks by mitigating them when we can.
Okay, so I'm looking at the clock too. We have these two that we have to do. We have three that we just did a little brainstorming here internally coming out of the risk mitigation work or the risk workshops in the last month, and then thinking about other things that we could do, the preservation focus and the system expansion that has been, a key component of Caltrans on the SHS with our expansion of bike and ped facilities. On that front. But are there others? Does anyone have other ideas that maybe of investment strategies that we might want to consider? And if there are, please speak up, put them in the chat, because we're going to go straight here into a poll of at least these three and any others that you all might come up with and suggest, and do a ranking poll because we'd like to get from you, from this group, what are the top investment strategies that maybe we should consider adding into the TAMP and doing the analysis? Again, provide some additional insight about what are the potential trade-offs of executing some of these investment strategies. If anybody has anything, anybody want to speak up? If we don't get input, we're going to move straight into a poll. In fact, I just see here we've got we're kind of at the 5 minute mark. So I think in the interest of time, let's move straight into the polling section. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a poll. And what we were envisioning here was, maybe we would have had some suggestions for different ideas put forth by the group, and that we would put them all in a poll, that opportunity here to interact, for all of us to take a look and rank from highest to lowest what investment strategy or strategies are ones that we should consider in addition to the two that are required of the TAMP. And I'm going to, let's see, Fabiola is going to launch a poll here shortly. It should appear on the right-hand side of your WebEx interface. So hopefully everyone is seeing a Slido panel with three options. And the way you do this is you would just select the ones in order from 1, 2, 3, rank from highest to lowest. strategy that you would like to see considered in the TAMP. And as you do that, we should start seeing results. I think after you submit, you would then see the results appear in the sidebar after you submit the send button. Hopefully everyone can see this. I'm seeing 14 votes so far coming in, 18. Let's see, we have 60 participants and seeing 26 coming in. So once we hit roughly 45 or 50, I'll assume when things leveling off, and then we'll close the poll. We're at 30. All right, maybe things are slowing down a little bit. I'm seeing 31. I'm just going to grab from this. Okay, so the outcomes of the poll, let's see, 34. Okay, we're still coming in. A few more. If you could wrap up, because we're down to the last few minutes. What I'm seeing here is what was ranked the top investment strategy to consider is greater preservation focus. So that's a good one. That aligns with an example we saw earlier. The second one I'm seeing here is the inclusion of risk mitigation funding, and the last one is funding system expansion. So we will take this into consideration and look at considering these 3 different investment strategies as we move forward with the TAMP. So appreciate your participation and input on this. I'll turn it back over to Mike to take us to the finish line here.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I think these are similar to the ones that we had done previously. So probably no big surprise there, but thanks everybody for that. Okay, so where we are, just want to make sure that everybody's clear. The investment strategies will be analyzed at a statewide level. So we're not asking every MPO to do all of these strategies. We in Caltrans will do it. So we just wanted to get the input so that we, are kind of moving in the right direction. So that's the main thing. All the MPOs are required to do is the performance targeting analysis tool for a 10-year period to get to the targets that you want to set or get close to the targets that you're setting. So just want to be crystal clear on that. We're not asking you to do all these scenarios. We will be doing these scenarios. But in order for us to do them, we need everybody's worksheets back so that we understand sort of what you all are trying to do, and then we'll sort of aggregate that up to a statewide answer. Okay, so some closing remarks. We talked about how this agency-specific performance targeting analysis tool has been provided to all MPOs. All you need to do is develop the fiscally constrained scenario. We will do the statewide investment strategies from that, and then those will be presented in the draft report. So the big action item for all MPOs is by August 15th to get, we certainly appreciate them early, but if we can't get them early, no later than August 15th, to get your MPO's worksheet back. And I think that will give us what we need to be able to get to work on the investment strategies and the narrative of the TAMP, and then that will ultimately lead to a draft. So I did see there was a question that came in from Warren Whitaker about complete streets. And I think that Warren would have been under the expansion, right? So we're going to build new bike and ped infrastructure that doesn't exist. We're going to do that to expand the system, but that comes at the expense of the funding that's available for condition improvement. So of the 3 that we ranked, that was the lowest of the 3, but still it's sort of perennially been there as one of the strategies we want to look at. Okay, with that, any final questions? I know we're at time, but if folks need to check out, that's fine. If anybody has any questions of the Caltrans team, we will stick on the call for a bit to answer anything that anybody has. Okay, we've got a number of folks still on the call. If there's any questions, if you want to raise your hand or just unmute yourself, we're here and available for you. If you have questions on your performance targeting analysis tool, on anything we covered today or any of our prior workshops, It's all fair game at this point. Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing anybody. Oh, sorry, Steven.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. I'm one of the newbies with filling this out for SCAG. So I was looking at our 10-year performance gap analysis on, I think, both pavement and bridge tab. They're highlighted in red. Does that mean that we need to move off of the default, or is that? I guess I'm kind of unclear what that means. It seems like a negative.
Highlighted in red. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Can
Let
you
me
share
do
a
that.
screen?
Yeah.
I think we have the creator of the PTAT in the call here with us. So you got the 18. Oh yeah,
Cool.
that's
Okay.
just those
Okay.
two little salmon colored cells down there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just
This is.
showing that with the investment level that you have at the end of 10 years in the kind of goldenrod colors above that to the right. Yeah. With the investment level that you have, we would expect you to have 26% good, 61.5% fair, and 12.4% poor.
Mhm.
And if you look to the very right, your targets are more aggressive than that. Okay.
I see.
And that means that you're going to fall short a little bit. And what the red cells indicate is, in this case, how many square feet of bridge. I think this is your bridge worksheet, it looks like.
Yeah.
So it looks like you're going to fall short 237,000 square feet of fair and 112,000 square feet of poor. So typical bridge is about 20,000 square feet. So you're probably 5 or 6 bridges shy of, well, you're not 5 or 6 bridges shy of your target. Like you might have to do one more bridge, for example, or a couple more bridges, and you could get to where you want to be. Right. So this is just trying to
Mhm.
quantify how much actual work would you have to do to achieve your current targets.
I see. Okay. So we don't need to be getting rid of the salmon color. That's just
That's
an
just for your
FYI.
information. So
Yeah.
if someone asks
Okay.
you, hey, based on the amount of money we have, we're going to get to these things in gold,
Mhm.
and your targets are currently in the far right column in white.
I see.
And so you're going to fall short of your proposed target right now. And that
Okay.
is a quantification of how much you're going to fall short. And then down below the salmon color is an estimated cost of what it would take for you to meet your targets. Yue, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but that's my understanding of how it all works.
Yes, you explained very well.
So in effect, for $137,000, you could achieve your target. Otherwise, without that $137,000, I'm sorry, 137 million, you're going to fall short.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So one, Stephen, I mean, I don't know if is this the first time you've used this worksheet?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so it sounds like you understand it, but I'll just say that in terms of the locally owned national highway system, SCAG is about a 40% owner of the whole local system.
Right.
So your work is very critical to our work. So if you need anything, we need you to be successful, I guess is what I'm saying.
No pressure,
So
right? Yeah.
but I mean, we're happy to help you. If you need
Yeah.
anything, we can schedule a one-on-one session. We'll
Okay.
bring in whatever expertise, but the SCAG response is absolutely critical.
Yeah. I think it was just, I want to make sure. Yeah, I think the default is what we're going to go with. I just want to make sure that when I saw the salmon color, that didn't mean that we needed to actually move off from the default and start changing the assumptions in there to achieve that. But I see what you mean by it's an FYI, so that's good for us to know.
Yeah, it's a tool to help you. Like you could go have a conversation. Ultimately, I don't know where this boils up to, but my previous boss was your executive director, and at some
Yeah.
point, it's like I could see Comey saying, "Well, what would it take for us to get to our targets?" You have the answer right there. You know
Okay.
exactly
Perfect.
how much money and exactly how much quantity, and you would have that for both pavement and bridge. Right, so it's meant to help you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a great tool. So thank you to you and the team.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. Last call.
No, Chris Long has his hand up.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
sorry,
did have
Chris.
one. Mike, no worries. Excellent. I think some reason my video is not coming on. I don't know. I must have a conflict. One of the oh, there it goes. One of the things I'm wondering for those that are left, those that haven't been able to budget for risk, any I don't know whatever resistive forces they've been getting. Could you share kind of how big picture how you were able to overcome that and how you would identify how much you should be? Is it just a wag at this point, 10%, 15%, or is there kind of a way to systematically narrow it down? And then the second half of that is that risk. In my mind, I think of it as we have this project that all of a sudden it's scour critical or it's got this failure and it needs to be a failure mechanism and it's closing or about to close and we need to repair it. Could you kind of share just those two things, how you've been able to overcome resistance and getting funding, and I guess three things, how you get funding and typically what you see that risk funding being paid for or used for?
You're asking for a Caltrans response or the MPOs?
Yeah, just your perspective and experience. Maybe help others that, from my perspective, it seems like a lot of owners haven't been using percentages of their funding for risk, but I don't know. It's awareness.
Yeah.
So it's really for those.
Well, I mean, for those that don't know, and I know you do know, Chris, but my background, is in the bridge program. I spent 25 years in the bridge program, and from that, I developed a healthy respect for bridge scour. I've seen a number of bridges collapse from bridge scour, or almost collapse. And so, in my role, we largely determining what investment level goes where. And that respect for scour and what we're seeing on Highway 1 with our slides, these are real things that are happening to us. We have real segments of state highway that get inundated periodically and get closed. So we have to try to balance the work, the investment that we could put in risk. And so the way we do it is we look at what could we afford. We basically just say pick a number and put that towards risk and then say, okay, what does that do now to conditions? So we can look just at the same worksheet that all the MPOs have, and you can see, okay, well, if I invest 10% of my available budget in risk mitigation, that's going to result in 3% more poor, okay, or 5% more poor, or whatever it is. The nice thing about that Excel worksheet is you could play around all you want. And through that, I think you develop a feel for how much could I do before the wheels kind of fall off on the condition of the system. And then at that point, it's kind of how hot is hot, right? Like how much pressure are you getting for risk mitigation relative to infrastructure condition? And so to some degree, we feel our way through it with a lot of influences from a lot of places. And the reality is in Caltrans, we not only have the risk mitigation, we have the damage cost. So like in my world, we have gone 3 consecutive years with over $1 billion of damage to the state highway system for 3 years running now. This year was 1.25. We were at 1.3 2 years ago and 1.1 last year. That's about 20+% of all available funding is going towards damage mitigation. So when you start to realize that, you're like, okay, this is not sustainable. So how do we get out in front of that? And it's hard because you're paying to fix the damage at the same time you're trying to harden the system or make it more resilient. But you have to do both. Otherwise, all you're doing is mopping up for prior damage, right? And so how do you do that? We get a lot of interest in system expansion, particularly in the non-vehicle modes. And so that has to be balanced in there too. So it's more of an art than a science, but the tool helps because you can, in a matter of seconds, see, well, what would the impact be? In fact, you could do a whole sensitivity analysis by graduating your risk percentages 5% at a time and then looking at the corresponding condition.
That helps. I was asking, I think, hopefully those that don't have a lot of funding or haven't been able to allocate funding to its benefits and how to overcome that. Thank you. I'm good.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else? Last call for folks? All right. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.